Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. People will keep joining. So welcome as you are joining. My name is Anita Harriet, and I'm president of the Fine Art Group. I'm going to pass this on to Carol, who will introduce herself and just get us started today. Carol?
Wonderful. Thanks, Anita. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion today surrounding art and collectibles and the rise of alternative investments. We are having a great panel. We have a financial expert as well as some art experts to really add value and bring you some insights today. As Anita said, for those that may have missed it, this call is being recorded, so it will be sent out to the group after. So to introduce myself, my name is Carol Hensel. I'm a personal risk specialist at USI. I've been advising on automobile and home protection for going on a decade, which is hard to believe. A lot of what I do is also helping with collections, specifically art collections. My clients will call me and they'll tell me they're traveling with artwork or they've acquired a new piece and they're looking to me for guidance. So I design a program that really protects their artwork. If they have very specific questions, I pull in professionals in the art market, like those on the call today. If they're asking about a value or if they're asking, about artwork in transit and need a vendor, always trying to make sure they're protected properly. So with that being said, I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Anita. As she said, she's the president of the Americas of the Fine Art Group. So Anita, if you'd like to take it from here.
Yes, and hello, everybody. And today, as you know, the topic is we're looking specifically at art and collectibles as an investable asset, an alternative asset, one might say. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and then we will get going and really dig deep into this topic. So Maya, off to you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anita and Carol, for having me. My name is Maya Moore-Irick. I lead the IRIC group at Merrill Private Wealth Management. We are a national wealth management practice. We work with our clients in everything from understanding their full investment portfolio to helping them plan for their future from a wealth perspective, and then also just making sure that their legacy and impact is realized. So I'm excited to be here. Many of the clients that I work with use art as a specific asset class in their overall portfolio, but they also try to utilize their collection to really be able to realize their legacy and the impact that they want to have, not only on the artist's life, but on the communities in which they're a part of. So thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. Off to you, Hetty. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I am joining you today as an art collector. I've been collecting art for about 25 years. And I am based in Asheville, North Carolina, and Merida, Mexico, where I am right now. I am also co-creator of several art spaces in Asheville, North Carolina. Pink Dog Creative, which is a large mixed-use complex of 30 artist studios, restaurants, coffee shops, galleries, shops, etc. And 22 London, where my partner Randy Schull and I produce, curate exhibitions from our personal collection every year.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hetty. And you're in Mexico today?
I am in Mexico.
We're everywhere today. Colleen, off to you. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, Anita. So I am Colleen Boyle. I am the National Sales Director for the Fine Art Group. And I've worked with international corporations, museums, private collectors across the globe to help them both value and manage their art and collectibles. I've also provided legal analysis for court cases involving art valuation and identification. And recently I've earned the Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy designation. Some of you may know it as CAP. And I regularly assist clients with strategies using these passion assets for charitable endeavors.
Thank you so much. And I am Anita Harriet. I am president of the Fine Art Group for the Americas. The Fine Art Group is the largest vertically integrated art and collectibles group. And essentially what that means is that we look at our clients' entire collection and manage it with a 360-degree approach with all of our services embedded within the company. So we have an appraisal division, We have a lending division for non-recourse. We have acquisitions division or advisory. We have an agency or sales division. And we have, last but not least, but very pertinent to today, an investment division. Our firm was the first to actually develop an art fund about 21 years ago, and we have had 9 art funds since and work very, very deeply in the investment side of this business. So that makes me so happy to be able to discuss this topic today with such a really smart group of professionals. So let's begin. And the way I think we should begin is by kind of peeling the layers of the onion back by just looking at the title of this particular talk. So our talk today is Art and Collectibles, the Rise of Alternative Investments. So let's start with that term, art and collectibles. And I'm going to look to you, Colleen, to start us off here. When we talk about art and collectibles, what are we really talking about as it relates to investable assets? What area of the market are we seeing the greatest increase or used as investments? Which area of the art and collectible market?
So Anita, one thing everybody really needs to keep in mind is that the markets change. So what is a strong collectible market today in 2022 is going to be different than, say, 10 yeyears ago. And it's really important to really stay up to date on these trends. So a few areas where we're seeing, and I'm going to, when you're referencing strong collectible areas, it's where these assets have appreciated recently over time. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about investment or strong asset classes. The one area, obviously, in the art arena is the post-war and contemporary art market. If you follow the market, you will have noticed that over the last decade, the return on these investments in this space, they exceed the S&P on average if you're looking at the analytics. Not every piece of art, though, is going to go up in value, as Hetty will attest to. So it is very important, if you are going to be positioning yourself in this space, that you do buy what you love. But we are seeing more so than not that you can buy smart in the contemporary, post-war and contemporary art market. And we've seen lots of appreciation. But there's other areas to pay attention to as well. So other areas we've seen specifically over the past 2 years, during the COVID years, we've seen a real strong increase in men's luxury watches. There's been a strong increase in value in that particular arena, mostly because of the supply chain and the limited supply on the retail market. We've also seen increase in value in various, what we call card, C-A-R-D, collectibles, whether it's sports cards, specifically in the modern basketball and football arena, or even Pokemon cards. So we're seeing some strong returns in that particular market. And the other market I just want to mention, well, 2 other markets, jewelry. Again, we're seeing still global demand for certain types of jewelry, but we're also seeing strong demand for coins, certain types of coins, which is oftentimes an asset class that's been passed down. And there could be, a generation that is now the custodian, but don't know much about that collection. And again, it's really important to understand the value and where the market is. So those are just a few areas, Anita, that we've seen really being strong in today's marketplace and have shown some fairly significant appreciation over the last couple of years.
Maya, over to you, a couple questions. So number one, have you seen clients investing in, for instance, bullion, coins, et cetera, as either, a hedge against inflation or whatever the case may be? So that's question number one I want you to ask. And the second, then I want you to tell me a little bit about your client's portfolio of alternative investments as it relates to art and collectibles. So what are you seeing among your own clients?
And I think those are 2 very good questions. And it's been really interesting just to see the change in mindset, not only over the last 10 years, but over the last couple of years, right? Around what we consider to be art and how we're thinking about hedging from an inflation perspective. So we are seeing a slight uptick in people having an interest in owning actual true like gold bars, right? Which is very different than we had seen in the past. And I think some of the geopolitical events that are happening in the world are causing some of this concern coupled with COVID, in also in relation to inflation, but just some of these other events. So yes, but the pivot that I'm interested in talking about too, in relation to something that Colleen said, is actually this generational change from a client perspective. So I have clients that are in their 20s and some that go all the way up into their 90s. And I used to see that this passion investment, she used the word passion, and I love that. It used to be that art was this passion investment that some of the older clients would have an interest in, and maybe they'd say, okay, let's allocate 1% of our portfolio or assets to this. And now we've seen a dramatic shift that a lot of younger clients are saying, no, we want to be much more intentional. We want to build our art collection and have it be part of our overall portfolio. And we want to realize these investments in multiple different ways: tangible pieces of art, right? Or different kind of collections, shares, fractional shares, or even funds like Anita referenced, right? So this shift in seeing some of the younger clients want to invest and be part of this world is forcing a demand in the market for lots of different reasons. The other thing I would say is that a lot of these clients, this mindset shift, they're also wanting to be much more intentional with what type of art they're buying, where it's sourced from, right? And who the artists, the underlying artists are, which I'm hoping that we'll continue to have some conversations, about going forward.
One more question. Clients ask me this all the time, and you're just the woman to ask. So when you look at a client's overall portfolio and they say, listen, Maya, I'm ready. I want to invest in art, or I want to invest in trading cards. What percentage of my portfolio should be in these kinds of alternative estimate, part of the overall?
That was Anita's nice way of saying, you missed my second question. So yeah, that's a great question. So it typically depends on their overall net worth and the liquidity that they have in other parts of their portfolio. So often we look at alternatives as a specific sleeve within their broader portfolio. So it might be, between 5 to 15%, depending on who that person is, what their full balance sheet looks like. Now, as it relates to art and collectibles in particular, I usually say let's stick to single digits and be somewhere in the 1 to 4%, especially at the beginning. Now, if they're more of an informed consumer and they're doing all this research, or they have partners like the Fine Art Group, then that's a very different conversation, because they're making informed, empowered decisions. They're protecting it with the help of Carol, and that's a different dialogue. But typically single digits, 1 to 4%.
You're singing my song. I always tell my clients, I don't like to see them with in excess of 4%. So if you had a client that came in and had 25% or 30% of their overall portfolio in these tangibles, what might you say to them? What might be your recommendation?
Yeah, so we would likely come up with some kind of strategy to ensure that they have liquidity across their balance sheet. And that's when, partnering with someone like us. So yes, I lead the IRIT group, which is part of Merrill, which is part of Bank of America. We can actually lend against and collateralize their art collection. So we might do that if they can't sell out of that position in a seamless way, right? Because there's tax implications, estate implications, things like that. So what we might do is leverage it, use the cash to invest in other things like an equities portfolio of some sort, and then slowly wean them out of that position. But we would immediately partner with someone like you to get an understanding. What's the appetite for that 25%? Can it even be sold? How fast are we going to be able to flip it? I'll give you an example. I had a client that inherited a significant collection of furniture. Like, that's harder to transition out of than some other types of pieces of art.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot over to you, Hetty, and I'm sure right now your head is spinning, because here we're talking about percentage of your portfolio and the art. But honestly, when you were building your collection, did you ever give a thought? Did you ever sit down with your financial analysts or your financial planner and say, all right, we're going to be investing in art, and this is the percentage of my portfolio I'd like in the art? Was that something you even considered or do you consider today?
No, it was never anything that we considered. And I have to admit, it's not something that we even consider today. We are truly passion collectors. We buy art because we love art. We want to support the artists. We like the entire landscape that collecting art puts us in. And we travel for art, we interact with artists and galleries on a regular basis. So it's really only been recently that we've even thought of it as an investment.
Right.
Although we do donate art from our collection every year to museums. So from that perspective, it's been a good choice because we get a tax deduction for what we've donated.
Right. You know, whether you realize it or not, because you've immersed yourself in the entire art ecosystem and been so deeply involved in this decision making around building a collection, you've done so much of the due diligence that many do not do. And hence you've created a legacy collection, probably without even knowing that that's what you were doing. And we can go into that a little bit further as we do a deeper dive into your collection. But I want to pop up to Carol here. I feel like I'm in the Brady Bunch. So Carol, what are you seeing in your client schedules these days? Have you seen it? You've said you've been in this for 10 years, and that's the perfect decade to have this conversation because the change has been so dramatic. As you've reviewed schedules over the time and recommended which things need to be valued and which things don't, what are you seeing for your clients in terms of their schedules and what they're insuring?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I've found some of my clients have, really considerable art, and they aren't always having that discussion with me as the insurance advisor. It's really up to me sometimes to uncover that because they're so immersed in the actual collecting piece of it, and it's in their home, and it is something that they love, but they're not seeing it as the asset that it is. So I do something that's called a personal risk assessment. And it's typically when we're having that dialogue that I'm asking the client, do you collect? What do you collect? I'm trying to get values, and it's not a part of their program. And I'm like, we need to build this in. And sometimes we'll uncover, 500,000 in artwork or more than that. And it hadn't been a part of their program. And it's something that I'm like, we need to immediately get this accounted for.
Yep, no, I completely hear you. So I'm going to pivot over to Colleen to ask a question about value, because we're all talking about collecting art or collectibles as part of an investment. But what do we mean by investment value? How is that different than what you might insure it for? And this will pivot over to kind of some of the thoughts that Maya has as well. So tell me what we mean by value as it relates to these investments.
Yeah, so Maya mentioned, one of the concerns with collecting any type of non-cash passion assets is the tax implication, particularly if the value is escalating. There could be capital gains tax situations. There could be sales tax implications on an acquisition. There's all different types of tax scenarios to be aware of. So when you're talking about value, the one thing to be aware of is that there's multiple types of value depending on the objective of whatever the client's working on. So for example, from Carol's perspective, if a client is looking to create a risk management strategy around their collection, maybe they're in a high risk area, maybe they have a lot of artwork located in the coast of Florida or in California where there's a lot of wildfires, and they want to make sure that these objects are protected from loss. A client would be looking at a retail replacement value. What is the value? Not to find the same object, because these are unique objects, but something similar if the client had to go out to the retail market in a short period of time to replace that object. That would be one value. But in Maya's world, where she's really dealing with scenarios related to possibly donation or wealth transfer, tax situations, really the value that's most often needed is called a fair market value. It's really what the object would trade on in the open market, which usually we're looking at auction. And it's not just hammer, it's the hammer price plus a buyer's premium. So it's definitely a different value proposition. And there's more different types of values in addition to these two, depending on the scope of the project and why the client needs to understand the value.
So when we're talking about portfolio value, which is really investable portfolio value, we're really talking about fair market value. And generally that means auction price someone would pay at auction. So that's hammer plus premium. So for all of you out there thinking, well, what's the value of my collection for portfolio? You just want to ask your simple question. What would I pay at auction for a similar work? Now, for Hetty, who primarily you've bought either directly from the artist or from galleries, correct? So typically the primary value for a primary gallery or direct from the artist would be what we'd use for insurance. But something very, very interesting has happened with a lot of the artists that you have in your collection, Hetty. What we've seen is a compression, basically primary price and auction price have become the same thing. And in fact, auction price has gone beyond primary price for some of these artists. So in some cases, in what we call, which is not a real term, but I'll use it, even though it's not a real term, ultra contemporary, basically those artists living today, right, born after 1976. Wow. These artists, many of these artists' works that have entered the auction marketplace have actually achieved higher prices than you would have paid in the primary market. So I'm sure, Hetty, when you're looking at the cost basis, what you paid for something and what it's worth now, you're seeing a big differential in price for some of those artists. Is that correct?
That's correct. For actually a great deal of them, because we primarily now collect artists of color, and they have become extremely popular.
Right. We've seen a dramatic increase in pricing for artists, a cadre of artists of color, of which several of them are in your collection. So again, without realizing it, you've created a real legacy collection, but that wasn't your goal, but it's now your reality, but it's your reality, right?
It is our reality. It is.
So I want to talk about exactly what we just started talking about, which is the rise in pricing. What the heck is going on? And there are a lot of different reasons, but I'd love to hear the panelist view. Why is it when I worked at Sotheby's, I'm going to age myself, probably like when the ultra contemporary artists had the thumbs in their mouth, I worked at Sotheby's, and the pricing was quite steady, right? In the late 90s, early 2000s, this was a very steady market. We know that after the recession in 2009, something dramatic happened in the art market. So really from 2010 on, this has been a completely new game. Let's talk about the reasoning for that. Why have prices gone up so dramatically, not only for art, but other important luxury name goods, right? Everything from, important purses to Van Cleef jewelry to important artists. Maya, what do you think is the reason? Why do you think we've seen such an increase in the value of these assets? What are some of the economic reasons you think?
I think sometimes it depends on which actual type of, let's drill it down even deeper. So even between the asset class that you're talking about, like for luxury goods, for example, some of it is because of an increased demand and a smaller amount of supply, yeah. Right? Especially we've seen this over the last couple of years. It relates to leather and some of these products. So I think that's one of the issues, the same with men's watches, which Colleen referenced before. And then I think that the interest in the demand, in my opinion, what I've seen is related a lot to technology. So I think that the use of social media and some of these things has really heightened the exposure for certain artists, at least the ones that I've been paying attention to, right? Those underrepresented artists. And so it's caused a different dialogue in the community, and there's more accessibility. I also am very interested to hear, how Colleen responds to this, but we've noticed an uptick in fraud. And fraudulent pieces. So people are very concerned about buying from certain sources in certain parts of the world. So they focused in and honed in on just fewer artists and really a curated group.
Yeah, Colleen, off to you. Tell me some of the both geopolitical reasons. Tell me a little bit about why you think there's been such an increase in the value of a lot of these, post-war and contemporary luxury goods, et cetera. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so just to expand on Maya's comments, there's a couple of things influencing the dramatic value increases. First, you have to keep in mind, particularly over the last 2 years, if you look at the statistics for the increase in wealth, so the increase in the number of millionaires and billionaires globally, that's on the rise. So there's more people with more disposable income. And what are they doing? They're looking at alternative assets from the standpoint of acquisition. And what are they looking at? Well, they're looking at contemporary artwork. They're looking at men's luxury watches. They're looking at jewelry. They're looking at these luxury assets as acquisition. The second thing to keep in mind is who's buying. And that's really interesting statistically over the past 2 years. So in 2021, if you look at the contemporary art sales just for Sotheby's and Christie's, 20 to 30% of the acquisitions came from China. Okay, so a third of the buying base is out of China. So that's something to keep in mind. Geopolitically, globally, things are happening in the world. And if a third of the buying base is impacted, how is that going to impact the future pricing in these various asset classes? The third thing to keep in mind is something Maya brought up, is that younger generation. And not so much what are they buying, because that's important, but why are they buying? The motivation, as Maya mentioned, is very, very different. They are very attuned to buying online. They are very interested in doing their research and understanding the analytics around the acquisition. And they're really concerned about social impact. As Maya mentioned, the artist, the materials, anything that can impact that particular artwork and positively benefit the art world. So the motivation is very different than just an aesthetic, which often has been the case in the past. As Hetty said, the objective was to buy what you love. And we still say, please buy what you love. But there are added parameters involved, particularly with a younger collector who's coming into the marketplace and what they're looking for from the standpoint of value proposition.
So if you look at the whole ecosystem of the art world, if we looked 15 to 20 years back, there were almost no art storage facilities. There were almost no Freeport art storage facilities. You might have had one or two in Geneva, a bit in Luxembourg, but now it's actually a whole new business, right? If we look both, and even in Harlem, right, there is a Freeport, Delaware, Portland. We're looking at Hong Kong, Singapore, Luxembourg, Geneva. I mean, God knows what's in those free ports. I mean, it would probably blow your mind. So if we look at the development of the whole ecosystem of the art world, it's changed dramatically to push towards a more investment-focused approach. Maya, if a client came to you and said, listen, you've told me 4%, I'm good. I promise I won't spend more than 4%, but I'd really like to invest, let's say, in art as an alternative investment. What would be your first key pieces of advice for that client just beginning that trajectory of building an investment-focused collection?
But you mentioned that they already had 1 to 4%. This would be in addition to it, or they had 1 to 4% in a different alternative asset.
So.
Exactly. I think the biggest thing would be to ensure that they have the right types of partners, like your team, so that they can make informed decisions and be educated about the market, right? Especially as a reference before the fraud. And I would probably try to identify other clients that were already collectors that they could spend time with talking to, like Hetty, so that they could be well informed about, okay, how do you even navigate this market? Where do you even start? And where do we go from here? I have a couple of executives, a married couple that has several children, and this is something that they were interested in. And they started going directly to underrepresented artists that they felt like they had a connection to and having them create custom pieces. Now, as we know, that is a very different market. So when we think about resale, we think about protecting it, we have to understand that if you're not buying from an established artist who has a history of being able to, resell at auction and whatnot, and somebody might not want a custom picture of your child, right? So the valuation might look a little bit different, right? It's our reality. So I think it's just making sure you're really informed, you're understanding the market, how to navigate, where are the proper sources to actually purchase from, and then how do we slowly fit that into your portfolio, and does it actually make sense for you? That would probably be the other thing. And do you want it to be a passion investor, or do you actually want to be a true collector? And what are your plans for your collection once you have it? Is it to donate it? Is it to keep it within your family? Do you truly want to own the art, or do you just want exposure? Because maybe then that's when we look at a fund or fractional shares, because there's lots of ways that you can realize being invested in the space.
So Colleen, we value millions and billions of dollars in collections every single year. What are some of the pitfalls you've seen, the mistakes clients have made, the don'ts? I mean, everyone wants to know what to avoid. What do you avoid? What should you avoid when you're trying to buy art with an investment as a focus? How do you avoid some of these mistakes?
I mean, I think Maya really has mentioned several things to be aware of. I think the first thing, and Hetty can expand on this, is what's the motivation? You know, to Maya's point, and to Hetty, I mean, Hetty is acquiring art because it is a passion. It's something that she's interested in. It's a world that it's been expanded to her, you know, whether it's the artists, the travel, the experiences, but she also has a plan, you know, and her plan is looking to donate to institutions, and institutions who are looking to acquire the type of artwork that she owns, because that's not always the case. And I'm sure Hetty and Maya have those experiences where museums, they're not always taking all the art. It depends on what their mission is. So it is important to have a plan and to understand your motivation. Um, there are plenty of people who go out to buy art for decorative purposes, and that's fine. If you're buying art for decorative purposes, you're buying art for decorative purposes. But if you're really looking to build a collection and, as Maya mentioned, create a legacy, which is what Hetty's done, it's a little bit more than just, you know, going to an auction house and acquiring. As Maya said, you really want to educate yourself. And it's really important to go to museums and go to exhibitions and go to auctions and visit dealers and visit artists, which I'm sure that's everything that Hetty has done and continues to do. So education is really, really key. And while you're educating yourself, you're going to figure out, well, what is your true motivation around the collection? And then also really thinking through the disposition. Are you thinking of donating directly to museums? If you are, does it make sense maybe to talk with the museum, and maybe the curatorial staff has certain objects that they're looking to acquire, and maybe it could be a collaborative effort, you know, to grow a collection? Or is the intention maybe to bequeath down, you know, keep it within the family, maybe start your own personal museum? I mean, there's a lot of options. I know that Maya could expand upon what clients are doing from a fiscal strategy perspective with these different types of collections. I'd say the biggest pitfall we see, it still is an emotional acquisition. So for any of you who've been to auction or have been to Art Basel or any of the other art fairs, it is still very emotional, the acquisition process. And it's real important to pull out a little bit and have some analytics around those acquisitions so that you do not overpay, particularly in an auction situation where somebody's bidding against you. And if ego tends to supersede, you know, the fiscal objective, you can end up overpaying for a piece of art, and that may not be the most prudent strategy. So I'd say education, understanding your motivation, having a plan for the collection, as Maya said, working with appropriate advisors and resources, and having a plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that makes perfect sense. And, you know, one of the things we like to talk about with clients is that while it's not very sexy to talk about an artwork the way you talk about a financial asset, if you are in fact buying it as a financial asset, you have to treat the due diligence like you would a financial asset. So you're not going to buy a piece of real estate without an appraisal and a full forensics on your potential investment, right? You're not going to buy a stock unless your portfolio manager is determined it really makes sense within the context of your portfolio. So we believe we look at 9 categories of analysis for each work of art to determine where that artwork fits in within overall quality of the artist's oeuvre, and what the price should be if you're looking to buy it as an investment. And that's really what we're talking about here. There's due diligence that's very, very important. Now, we've kind of talked a little bit about some of that due diligence. Let's talk about actual collecting and what it's like to be a collector, because one of the beautiful things, and my grandfather was an art collector, and when he died, his collection was the financial legacy for our family, right? It literally boosted generations of family because of his collection. So I know the lesson, and I understand how important it is. But I also know he was a collector and wasn't thinking that way, right? He did not buy African masks because he knew someday that would pay for my college education, right? So Hetty, take us through your trajectory, your journey. You know, how did it start? I mean, how did you decide I'm really interested in, number one, something that a lot of people weren't interested at the time, right? Which are people of color and kind of outside voices in the art market. Just take me through your trajectory. And I think Elizabeth might have an image for us to see of your most, of your traveling exhibition as well, which I think is really neat. But can you take us through that trajectory? Why did you start collecting?
Yeah, I guess we started collecting because we love art. And my partner, Randy, is an artist himself. And we were already pretty immersed in the art world through him and his connections and friends and colleagues. But initially we started collecting just whatever we loved. And then as we built this collection, we looked at it holistically and saw that, well, we have an awful lot of artists of color in our collection. And in our collection in the US, in Asheville, is primarily African American. And our collection here in Mexico is primarily Latin American. The piece that's up on the screen right now, well, you all recognize Kehinde Wiley's piece, but the Titus Kaphar, we bought before he became a real major art star. And we bought it because we loved it. And what we believe is that, and what we've seen from our own collection is that artists of color seem to have something to say that resonates with us, socio-politically, culturally. We just believe our values, believe in what they're trying to say with their art. And that's what we're attracted to. So that's what we're buying.
Can you tell me a little bit about the title Say It Loud and what that means to you and to the collection?
Sure. Say It Loud was the name of a song back in the 60s, I think 68. And we named our 2018 exhibition Say It Loud because we felt like these artists of color their voices had been kept down for so many years. And it was time to enable them to speak up and to say what they wanted to say, what they needed to say, and what people needed to hear them say, most importantly. So we titled our exhibition Say It Loud for that reason.
And tell me, where has the exhibition traveled to?
This particular exhibition traveled to Denison University. They have a museum there, and they kept it. Unfortunately, they got it right before COVID hit, so they ended up keeping it up for quite a long time. And individual pieces have traveled to other exhibitions, but as a total exhibition that Randy and I curated ourselves, Denison Museum on the university campus.
And have these works been used for curriculum as well in schools?
Oh yeah. During the exhibition that we mounted in Asheville, one of the things that we do that we're so happy about and proud of is art professors from the 4 or 5 different universities nearby bring their classes to the exhibition. And we always hold our exhibitions during the spring or fall so that students will be in school and can come and see it. And know that Denison created an entire curriculum around this collection. And I was really pleased they put together a video. All the students came to see the collection while it was in the museum there. I think it was part of their African American curriculum at the university. So it definitely has an impact.
Can you go to the next slide that focus in on the one work of art, Elizabeth? And can you please take us through that piece and give us kind of your thoughts about the piece? Obviously, it's a very important artist.
Right. This is Titus Kaphar, A Disturbing Silence, which he created in 2011. I think from a collector perspective and from an investment perspective, and I sort of want to stay on track there. One of the things I would recommend is for people who are interested in buying art as a collectible is to look at buying from those galleries who helped launch the careers of artists that we now consider art stars or superstars. They all have to start somewhere. They didn't all start at Gagosian or Hauser and Wirth or David Zwerner Gallery. So watch the programs of these galleries that help launch the careers of people like Titus Kaphar, or you can see in the background, Kehinde Wiley. And who are they showing now? And clearly the gallery not only has a good eye, but they help, they're not just there to sell art. They're there to launch a career for an artist. And we buy almost exclusively from galleries. And we've developed relationships with galleries that sell the type of work that is in our collection. And we take risks on emerging artists, but we do it primarily, not exclusively, but primarily through galleries that we trust, that we have a relationship with, and that have already got a track record of having launched the careers of artists that have become superstars.
You have brought a very important point to a discussion of investment for emerging artists, but what's also important is to understand that larger ecosystem. Those artists also want to be in your collection. So it is a tit for tat, right? When they go into your collection, that enhances their gravitas, right? And back and forth. Now that you're a secret weapon and you have a great eye, who are you looking at now? Is there someone you'd like to share now that you're looking at that is an artist you're kind of interested in and you'd like to kind of tell us a little bit about? If not, you can stay silent. We won't be angry, but is there someone you're interested in right now that you'd like to talk about?
There are several people that we're interested in. Vanessa German is a young African-American woman, and I think she should be and will be an art star one day. And she's making amazing work. David Schrobe is another that we just bought a piece of his. You know, we'll see where their careers go, but they're artists that we believe in.
Yep, got it. And are they both represented by the same gallery or different galleries?
Different galleries.
Yeah. Got it. Well, thank you. That's actually very, very helpful. For our last kind of few minutes together, I want us all to kind of give kind of our final statement and advice to those out there based on our own, what we do for a living and this focus on investment. So Maya, I'm going to start with you. Do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share in terms of your advice for clients potentially getting involved in this area?
I think it would probably be to take a step back, make sure you have an overarching wealth plan, so you have an understanding and a handle on all your assets, liabilities, and your cash flow, right? And then make sure that you have risk protection in place for any asset that you do have. And then as you grow that collection, as with any asset classes, Anita referenced, that you have the right team around you that have your best interest at heart, have a true expertise in and experience in what you're going through. And don't over concentrate or have too much concentration in one specific asset class. As with any other type of investment, diversification is key.
Diversification is key. I love it. Carol, over to you. I mean, I always say to clients, you're actually protecting a legacy when you insure correctly, but you know all the pitfalls. So give us a few key pieces of advice for clients, whether it's shipping or whatever you think is important in terms of protecting the client's
Sure.
collection.
I think it's very important to be working with a true insurance advisor who knows the carrier partners, because there's certain carrier partners that have a niche in the art market, and they actually have art experts that work on their team. So certain carriers they don't have the knowledge when it comes to a claim. There's very, specific things that should be followed. If someone suffers a house fire and there's smoke damage to their artwork, they want to be able to conserve that artwork as best as they can. So really partnering with people that know the market, I think, is very critical.
Yep. And Colleen, over to you.
Yeah, so I'd say three things. I'd say starting with education, and you could be a new collector. Make sure you educate yourself, going to visit galleries and exhibitions. But you could also be midway through your collecting endeavors, and you might pivot. So you might have started off with one genre of art, and maybe you're pivoting. And again, continuing to educate. To Maya's point, definitely plan. Really think about the ultimate disposition. What are your thoughts around where the artwork should go? And then lastly, just enjoy the journey. It's been great listening to Hetty's stories, and you can tell it's been quite an adventure, but an enjoyable one. So make sure you enjoy the process as well.
Hetty, any last thoughts for all those who are just starting to think about collecting? They haven't really begun. I'm sure you look at your first works you ever bought and you're thinking, what were we thinking? And here we are now. That's my favorite thing to do with a collection. So some bits of advice for those who are starting to think about a collection.
Sure. I would say educate yourself, just like Colleen did. Go to galleries, look at exhibitions. I would say go to art fairs for several reasons. One, you get to see a lot of art all in one place, and you begin after a while to see what captures your attention, what captures your eye. It's also one of the few places when you walk into an art gallery, you don't get to speak off the bat with the person whose gallery it's named after. But at an art fair, the owner of the art gallery is often there, and you get to actually talk to that person and have a conversation and develop a relationship with that person. And look at the galleries, like I said earlier, that have launched the careers of the art superstars, because they've already honed their eye and they already have proven that they can build the career of an artist.
And do you have, can you give us your top 3 favorite art fairs or 2? What are your favorites?
Well, we always go to the one in Mexico City called Mako.
Yep.
We just were there in February. We tend to go to Frieze, New York, and often Frieze, London, and Art Basel in Basel.
Oh, in Basel, perfect. That's best case scenario. Those are all excellent. And as you all know, Art Frieze is coming up in New York, the 18th of May. So I think that's our next good art fair other than TAFA. So get ready to sign up and go explore and see a lot of art. I would add 1 or 2 more points. Hetty has bought primarily from galleries, and I think that's been a very interesting way to dive into important emerging artists. We are very focused on auction acquisition as well, primarily because, when you're looking for investment, it's willing buyer, willing seller. It's not opaque. It's very clear. You either raise the paddle or you don't, or you press the button on your computer these days or you don't. So we do look to auction, and just like art fairs, walking the auctions in May, you can see so much art. And it's all for sale, which is also an interesting, dimension. It's not a museum. So in 1 day period, 2 day period, you can go to Phillips, you can go to Sotheby's, you can go to Christie's, you can go to Bonhams, You can even go over to Doyle. There's just so many really great auctions you can see. And that's a great way to start collecting as well. So I want to thank everyone today for a terrific panel. This has just been so interesting. And Hetty, thank you for joining our investment focus. And I actually think you gave some great investment advice. Maya, do you want to close it off?
I wasn't sure, Anita, if you wanted to have Colleen answer the one question in that in the Q&A.
Okay.
I see one question in there for, looks like it's for Colleen.
Oh, got it. Colleen, it's all yours. Do you see it, Colleen?
I do.
I can
So I'm
read
gonna-
it to you. Are you
Okay.
got it?
Yeah, I can read it. It says, hello, I'd love to hear some opinions about digital art and collectibles. Is it a legitimate trend? And I'm going to make the assumption you're talking about NFTs, because that's what's the latest and greatest in the art market. Yes, NFTs are something you definitely want to be aware of. You want to educate yourself on NFTs just like you would with any other asset class that we've been discussing today. The numbers are phenomenal as far as what has transacted from 2020 to 2021, and it's going to most likely continue. We're seeing not only in the art world, but you're going to start to see in the sports world as well, all different types of NFTs. Social media is a very, very strong influencer in that space. But again, there's lots of issues to be aware of, like any other asset class. So make sure you surround yourself with the appropriate resources and due diligence prior to any type of acquisition. Anita and Maya, I don't know if you want to add anything to that statement about the
Well, you know,
NFTs?
they're two basic. You can either work within the community of artists that work traditionally within that kind of crypto community, or you can go to the auctions where they're and the galleries where they're already starting to embrace certain artists that have both physical and NFT or digital options. You know, I always like, because I'm a highly conservative person, to look at artists that have both the physical and the NFT so that you can have both. And these are artists that are already established in the market. So a good example would be a Damien Hirst, for instance. You can purchase an NFT for Damien Hirst, but you can also buy the physical asset. So from a conservative financial perspective, that is the way I would go to start. And with that, I will now turn it over to Maya.
I think that in most of the last points from everyone on the panel, we captured a lot of the key takeaways, but I just wanted to thank again our gracious hosts and the panel for joining us today. And thank all of you for listening to learn more about how to invest in art, grow your collection intentionally. I loved hearing about Hetty's background in this, and protecting your collection as you would any other asset. We hope that you really enjoyed this conversation, and I would just reiterate three things that we all mentioned in our takeaways, right? There are many different ways that you can invest in art, whether it's through purchasing pieces directly, owning fractional shares, or investing in an artist themselves. The second would be that you need to ensure that you're thinking of associated costs, and we didn't really go into this as much, but there's lots of hidden costs when building your collection. And there's also risks that come with owning this unique asset class. So that's the second thing. And then of course, the final third thing, you know, you need to make sure that you're building the right team of advisors. So I love the fact that we had well representation from the Fine Art Group, from USI, a very well-known collector herself, Hetty, and make sure that, you know, as you're surrounding yourself with the right advisors, that you are building your expertise, your own expertise, growing and flexing those muscles so that you can be well on your way. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.